I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. This is oral storytelling in its truest form. I write every episode myself, and then, like the Scandinavian bards known as skalds, I perform them in one single, flawless take. SKALD is serialized, but feel free to start with any episode, including this one. Later, if you want some backstory, check out the previous episodes of the podcast or pick up the prose volumes on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 67. She refused to kill him. She refused to have him killed. She refused. Though her advisors pressed her, though they pleaded and begged, she did not give in. She did not acquiesce. And why should she? After all, she was the Lady of Ravenna, that city's sorceress protector. She had spent decades rebuilding that once thriving city-state. She and she alone. Though the brothers, though the twins would have liked it to have been otherwise, she alone had saved the city, had stopped the violent convulsing that threatened to shatter it into dust. And it was she, and she alone, who took up the reins, who led what remained of Ravenna's broken, terrified populace, their minds shattered by the magics of their old rulers, by their constant struggles and manipulations. It was she who had used every ounce of her strength, every ounce of her power, every ounce of her ability, who had sacrificed her youth, her vitality, her very life to bolster the city's defenses. It was she, and she alone, who sacrificed herself upon that gleaming black altar of shadow, whose skin grew wrinkled, whose bones grew brittle, who became as gnarled as the staff she now leaned upon. She and she alone gave of herself to save that city, to salvage what she could, to build a better future, one without the slavery that had defined its past. She and she alone had saved Ravenna, had created Ravenna, and driven it toward a new future, a brighter future, because she was that city's peerless regent, the one who styled herself not as a queen of Ravenna, but as its lady. Her name was Caleria. And now, seated in a low chair, she eschewed the throne that she in her youth had been so eager to sit upon. Now, she shook her head slowly, definitively, scowling at the advisors that surrounded her. No, we will not. The head proctor, the fearful little man who, through political machinations and clever cowardice, had risen up through the city's ranks, nervously wiped the sweat from his forehead. My lady, please, you must understand. Caleria, less offended at his language and more by his very presence, by the craven aura that enveloped him, she snapped, purposefully letting the spittle fly from her ancient lips in a flagrant show of disrespect. I'm sorry, In my old age, I must have missed. The proctor blubbered. No, my lady, please. But she continued, I must have missed how it is that you tell me what I must do. She pounded her staff upon the worn cobblestones of her chambers. Do I not still rule this city? The head proctor knew better than to respond. So they sat speechless. The only sound breaking the silence was the belabored breathing of that gutless coward. They sat there, mired in that unbearable, pregnant stillness, until Caleria, softening her expression, began to speak again. I aim to rebuild Ravenna. I aim to have it reach and exceed its previous heights. Killing this man, this vermin prince, as he calls himself, would do nothing to help that goal. A tentative cough came from across that ancient wooden table, fashioned of some forgotten wood, crafted before the worlds were sundered. My lady, if I may. It was Caleria's general, Takia, a man whose instincts in combat were unparalleled, but a man who too often forgot that not every battle can be won through combat alone. Yes, Takia. Caleria gestured a withered hand at her general. Please. Takia cleared his throat. He spoke softly, spoke in the voice of a man with the confidence to have nothing to prove. It was before my time, naturally, but you once held another enemy of yours within your grasp, the High Elf Queen, Enlith. The general paused, tentatively. Continue, Takia. He shifted in his seat. Yes, my lady. You, in your mercy and in your wisdom, you spared Enlith. But now, the eyes of all Caleria's advisors grew wide in anticipation and excitement, in fear for Takia, who now spoke an obvious truth, but one that Caleria would be loath to hear. Now, her kingdom is more powerful than ever. Now, her spies grow increasingly bold. Now, her forays into this realm, into your realm, are increasingly frequent. And now, you have yet another powerful enemy to contend with, one that you might have crushed when you had a chance. That pregnant silence fell over the room once again as Caleria sat, deep in thought, near overwhelmed with the weight of her decisions, the weight of the crown which her neck had grown too weak to wear. She massaged her aching joints, and she sighed. If you were to have your way, Takia, what would you have done? Takia sat up straight and spoke confidently. My men would hunt him down. They would kill him in the very filth he wallows in. They would cut off his head, as well as any of those with him, and they would mount them upon pikes, a warning to all those who would defy you." The general swallowed hard, satisfied with himself. "My lady." Caleria nodded slowly, and she began to speak again. "If you could find him, and I would remind you that we, as of this moment, have no idea where this vermin prince lays his head." She looked at Takia, that heavily muscled, frightful man, the one who had spilled enough blood in her service to fill an ocean. She stared him in the eye, and the general, with no other choice, he looked away. "If you could find him, and if you killed him, you would only create a martyr." Another advisor, a newer one, she couldn't be troubled to remember her name, spoke up. "Yes, that's possible, my lady, but—" Caleria, refusing to spare the advisor even a glance, continued speaking. "The people love him. Those who feel left behind, who feel discarded and unwanted, they adore him." She pushed herself to her feet, eager to stretch her creaking knees. "If you were to kill this vermin prince, you would soon find yourself with another. And this, the one whose head you mounted on a pike?" Caleria chuckled. "He would become their god." Takia, frustration growing inside of him, a frustration over his inability to protect his regent, spoke once again. "Then what would you have us do, my lady? We cannot let his insurrection stand. We cannot. Are we to stand back and let him just take the city? Can we not fight him?" Caleria, leaning heavily on her staff, hobbled over to the window, gazing out upon the city, upon her city. "Well, we'll fight him. We must fight him. It's just—" She gazed out at the border realm's dual suns, allowing them to burn her vision. "I prefer to fight a man over a myth." Takia, the only one brave enough to continue pressed on. "And we need to do something, my lady, and soon." He began to speak more forcefully. "They're able to reach you, to breach your defenses. They are able to intrude upon even this most heavily guarded sanctuary." Takia pleaded with her. Had things gone slightly differently, ever so slightly, I fear that we would not even be able to have this conversation. Caleria turned to face Takia, smiling, invigorated by the piercing pain the dual suns had bestowed upon her. "Killing him is off the table. My mind has been made up. What else can you suggest, Takia?" The general paused, deep in thought. "We don't even know who he is. We know nothing. That damnable refrain they all repeat." He frowned. "If you won't allow me to bring you his head, we should at least find out more about him. Where he is. Who he is." Galeria smiled slightly. You're not wrong. Takia began to rise from his chair. I will supervise this mission myself, my lady. You will not. But Caleria raised her hand, interrupting him. No. He would see your men coming a mile away. He likely knows them already. And besides, your men's talents, they're best used elsewhere. Caleria hobbled over to a darkened corner of her chambers, grinning as she stared into the darkness. There are many that I can call upon, and there is one man that I know is exceptionally well suited for this task. The general, disappointed but obedient, spoke softly. Shall I send for him? Caleria shook her head, grinning. No, I'm more than capable of doing that myself. Then, quickly, suddenly, she pursed her lips tightly together, letting out an impossibly shrill whistle. And as she did so, the shadows at her feet began to stir. Gonith was enjoying some rare time off. A mercenary, a man willing to spill blood for the highest bidder, no matter who they might be. His services were always in demand. No matter who ruled the world, no matter who pulled the strings, they would always need someone to kill for them. They would always need someone like Gonith. So he stayed astoundingly busy. He didn't look like the hardened killer that he was. His stature was imposing enough, to be sure. Gonith boasted a tall, well-proportioned frame. It was rare that he met a foe that he didn't tower over. And once clad in the heavy plate metal he preferred, once armed with his massive shield and even more massive broadsword, the one he managed miraculously to wield in a single hand, slinging it to and fro as if it was nothing more than a rapier, he looked less like a mercenary and more like a knight, with a handsome, almost cherubic face that exuded a pride that had long gone extinct in that border realm. Gonith was young, distressingly young. He had not only the eagerness of the young, not only their lightning reflexes, but also, most terrifyingly, their lack of fear. He held the sincere belief that death was only for the old, the stupid, and the slow. He hadn't lived long enough to learn the meaning of regret, of remorse. He was, above all else, a professional. He only took jobs he knew he could accomplish, and he had taken every job ever offered to him. Fighting, guarding, tracking, espionage, and reconnaissance. He could do it all. He did do it all. And for his talents, he was paid exceedingly well. He had been in Ravenna for only a day. His previous job had brought him there, tracking down a group of bandits. Amateurs. They wept. They actually wept when he burst into the hovel in which they hid. And through their tears, they chanted something. They repeated something over and over. Something about who they served. The varmint prince? No, he couldn't be troubled. He didn't care. So he cut them down with the words still on their lips. He liberated their scalps from their skulls. He took them to his client, to the one who seemed horrified by the proof he insisted upon bringing, and then, naturally, fearfully, that client paid Gonith exceedingly well. Now, his pockets heavy with coin, jingling loudly, an arrogant boast for all those present, Gonith swaggered proudly into the tavern. It was the best tavern in the city, which meant very little. It could scarcely compare to the pleasure houses of the southern cities, the ones that dotted the coastline, as depraved as they were delightful. But this place, this tavern, it had wine, it had music, it had gambling, and it had women. And that was all Gonith needed. A place to spend his money until it was time to take up his sword once again. But as Gonith made his way to a table, to the one directly by the fire, the table he had claimed for himself the day prior, claimed for his own for as long as he blessed Ravenna with his presence. A shambling, disheveled figure barreled into him. Gonith was taken aback, literally taken aback by the blow, as that squalid figure was somehow far, far more dense than he appeared. That paunchy, stumbling buffoon boasted a hilariously low center of gravity, one that, if Gonith hadn't stepped back quickly, adjusting his footing, could have very well taken the mercenary off of his feet. But that wasn't what truly had taken him aback. No. He had been truly taken aback by the figure's audacity, his temerity, his insolence. And so, as the figure swayed back and forth, his greasy gray hair hanging down in front of his flushed oval face, Gonith brushed off his tunic, the one he opted for over his armor when pursuing his predilections. And he did as he always did when confronted by a drunk. He issued a dire warning. I say this one time, and one time only. Gonith stepped in closer to the drunk as the crowd in the tavern fell ominously silent. You have made a grave, grave error. You have stumbled out onto a precipitous ledge. And now you have a decision to make. You may decide to step away quickly, quietly, immediately. Gonith, his sword and shield locked in his room, began to unsheathe the long dirk he wore at his side. Or you may decide the manner of your death. As Gonith brandished his dirk, the long blade nudged his pocket, setting his coins jingling once again. And as if heeding a clarion call, the drunk raised his head quickly, flipping his hair back and revealing a pair of bright green eyes that, though they were buried in an oval face lined with age, worry, and drunkenness, flashed with something fey. I choose drowning. The drunk hiccuped and pointed at Gonith's full pockets. And it sounds like you have enough to kill us both. The crowd in the tavern, the tension broken, began to chuckle, and the drunk started to laugh with them. Gonith, however, was stunned into silence. In his young life, he had never experienced such disrespect. Even as a child, the other children, they had known better. They had seen what he could do, had seen what he would do if challenged. But this drunk, this fool, he would deign to disturb him, and then, as if that was not enough, he would ask that Gonith, buy him a drink. As Gonith watched, silently, the blood rushing through his body, making his skin grow hot with fury, the drunk began to mug for the crowd, swaying back and forth erratically as he spoke. I look to escape this world through the only way that man may ever do so. Through that unspeakable bliss, through the forgettable ecstasy of intoxication. But as the drunk staggered and spun, he lost his footing, falling backward against Gonith, driving his ponderous bulk into the mercenary once again, but this time smashing into the unsuspecting mercenary's hand, sending his dirk clattering to the floor. It was too much. It was far too much. This drunk had stumbled into him not once, but twice. Did he not know who Gonith was? Could he not see with whom he trifled? The drunk wanted to escape the world, did he? Well, Gonith was all too eager to oblige him. So as the drunk leaned against him, struggling to regain his footing like a man upon a stormy sea, the mercenary reached out and seized that old fool by his sordid rags. But no sooner did Gonith grab that filthy ensemble than the drunkard twisted and spun, freeing himself from the mercenary's grasp and stumbling toward the door in peals of riotous laughter. Gonith, enraged by the drunk's disrespect, embarrassed and further enraged by the audience that now watched them, laughing and cheering the drunk on, he left his dirk lying upon the floor. He wouldn't need it. All he would need were his massive, powerful hands. And he charged the drunk. Gonith drove his massive frame through the room, knocking aside the tavern's chairs, tables, patrons, and employees. He could afford the damages. He could afford them twice over. But what he could not afford in the slightest, was to be made a fool of by a fool, by the drunken old man that now stood by the door, singing a particularly grotesque verse of a particularly vulgar song. But as Gonith lunged toward that singing drunk, as his powerful hands drew mere inches away from the old fool's neck, the drunkard dropped into a crouch, and as Gonith stumbled forward, unprepared for the void into which he now fell, the drunk stood back up, using his ponderous bulk to flip his massive opponent up over him, forcing the mercenary out the door, sending him tumbling into the street. As Gonith, mortally embarrassed, pulled himself up from the ground, up from the filth into which he had fallen, the drunk, that giggling buffoon, stumbled out of the tavern and spoke in slurred speech. Wouldn't it have been easier? So much easier. Just to buy me. He hiccuped and grinned. A drink. Gonith didn't have any other weapons on him, but he didn't need them. He shouldn't have needed them. He should have been able to seize that drunk, to squeeze the life out of him, to beat out what little sense remained in the old clown's skull. He had taken on entire armies and been victorious. He had never been defeated. He had never been on the wrong side of a fight. He should have been able to demolish the old drunk, to put him definitively into his place, to make good on his promise and his warning, to kill the grinning old man. But he could not. He could not. As hard as Gonith tried, he could not. He couldn't even touch the old man, or he could, but only when the old man wanted him to. Only when the old man flung himself at Gonith, knocking the mercenary off balance and back down to the muddy ground, time after time after time. Gonith tried to hit him, tried to punch, to kick, to slap, and to bite, but it was to no avail. The mercenary had fought the practitioners of all the great martial styles. His instincts were so finely honed that he could see an opponent's movements before they even thought of making them. But this fool, this drunk, this singing clown, his movements made no sense. They were impossible to predict. Every time Gonith thought he had a handle on where the old man was, on where he would be, the drunk would stagger and sway, stumbling just out of reach. And instead of the crunch of bone, the sickening thud of fist on flesh, Gonith only heard that insufferable laugh as his blows struck nothing but the crisp night air. Furious, abandoning his measured attacks for a flurry of haymaker blows, an endless barrage of massive punches, powered by the mercenary's Herculean frame, Gonith began to swing wildly, recklessly. But time after time after time, he missed. Again and again and again, he missed as the drunk spun and lunged unpredictably, always just a little out of the mercenary's reach. But suddenly, something changed. Gonith began to wrap his rapidly tiring brain around the drunk's movements. There was a pattern. Though he couldn't describe it, he knew it was there. So as a sadistic grin stretched across his face, Gonith threw a massive hook directly at the drunk's laughing face. He had the old man dead to rights, but just before his punch connected, the drunkard simply fell to the ground. Finally, this embarrassment could come to an end. Now it was Gonith's turn to laugh as he stalked toward the grounded drunk, the one who lay there, motionless upon the ground. But as he raised his boot, preparing to bring it crashing down upon the drunkard's neck, the old man deftly seized Gonith's foot and he pushed upward, sending the mercenary toppling down onto his back. Before Gonith could even begin to rise from the ground, the old man was upon him, cackling with glee. But no longer was the drunk simply rebuffing Gonith's attacks. No, Gonith, grounded, lying flat upon the earth, was in no position to even make an attack. No, he was in no position to attack the drunk or even to defend himself as the old man began to rain blows down upon him. Gonith knew a killing blow when he saw one. He knew a blow meant to kill when he felt it, and these were not killing blows. These were blows meant to disorient, to confuse, to distract, to embarrass and disrespect, and they were remarkably successful. Gonith would have sworn that the old man struck out with more limbs than he even possessed, would have sworn on his very life that the old man battered him with 8 weathered old arms, slapping him about the head hard enough to rattle his senses, jabbing him between the ribs and punching him in the kidneys. Gonith couldn't defend himself. He couldn't do anything, caught as he was in the maelstrom of that drunk's unpredictable attacks, at the mercy of that paunchy, disreputable old fool. That proud mercenary, that unstoppable force of death could do nothing but crawl to his knees, suffering under the ceaseless blows from his giggling assailant. The mercenary crawled away, retreating for the first time in his entire life. For the first time in his entire life, Gonith experienced cowardice, experienced fear, experienced the hateful, burning impotence that comes with knowing that you have been utterly bested, utterly defeated. And as he crawled away upon hand and knee, he felt a sharp kick directly in his tailbone, one that sent him sprawling face first back down into the muck of that darkened street. And when he looked back, his face smeared with human filth, he saw his assailant, the old drunk, who, having delivered his kick, had himself fallen back upon the ground. And it was there, lying face up in the dirt, that he guffawed wildly, struggling to catch his breath. For a moment, Gonith thought about turning back, thought about attacking the old man once again. Now that he had been winded, now that he had done his worst, he thought about going back into the tavern, about retrieving his dirk, about retrieving his sword even. But then he thought about what awaited him in the tavern, thought about the customers who had laughed as the drunk mocked and dishonored him. So without another thought, Gonith, his face flushed red underneath the filth that covered it, the mercenary rose, and he darted off into the night, the jingling of his pockets conspicuously absent in the crisp night air. His chest heaving, his lungs aching. The old drunk sat up slowly, struggling to breathe, partially from exertion, but mostly from laughter. As he panted, grinning, his heavy drunkenness giving way to a gentle, bemused intoxication, he scanned the streets around him, the brightly lit corridors of central Ravenna, the crumbling tower in the distance, and to his right, a gloomy alley, unnaturally dark, filled with shadows that shifted and took on mass, coalescing into a hulking form that moved steadily toward him. The breath that he had just struggled to regain suddenly left him as he gasped in shock, in surprise, and in terror. Upon his hands and knees, he scrambled backward to get away from the approaching creature, the corporeal shadow that prowled silently toward him upon massive paws, its long, thick tail swishing behind it as it raised its head, revealing 2 gargantuan yellow eyes, glowing orbs that cut through the shadow that they poured out of. Oh! The drunk stopped his wild scrambling. He began to laugh once again, a delighted chortle that quickly devolved into a hacking cough. It's you! He spat in the alley, put a hand on the head of the humongous black cat, and irreverently used the beast to help force himself to his feet. Can't that old witch let me be? Allowing the shadows to fall from its jet black fur, so black that it swallowed up any light foolish enough to come near it. It simply stared out from those narrowing eyes. Emotionless, it emitted a growl that rose up from deep, deep within the cat beast's monstrous form. The drunk chuckled to himself once again. Yeah, of course she does. Well, she's gonna have to wait. All right? He reached into his pockets and pulled out 2 handfuls of shiny gold coins, each one a veritable fortune. I told my friends inside I'd buy him a round or 4. I hope you're digging SKALD. If you are, help me help other people find out about the show by leaving a review, just like M. Reap RNR did on iTunes. Justice served poetically. Hook, line, sinker. Easy as your ABCs. As soon as Maul goes through the underneath, the masterful depiction of this realm will emotionally connect you to Maul's anguish, his destiny, and his desire to see it all through to the bitter, dirty end. It's easy. Just listen. Just like the Skalds of old, I couldn't create my art without the people who support it, without my patrons. By signing up at patreon.com/skald, by pledging a small dollar amount that is charged safely, securely, simply to their credit cards each month, these noble souls make it possible for me to keep SKALD going strong, week in and week out. If you want to join their number, if you want to get great rewards like free ebooks and shoutouts on the show itself, head to patreon.com/skald and sign up today. What are 4 brand new episodes of SKALD a month worth to you? Let me know by going to patreon.com/skald today. Every Tuesday, please talk about and plug SKALD online and in real life. I am shameless, and I share all SKALD compliments. Also, make sure to hit up AubreySitterson.com for links to everything, including SKALD, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, my comics work, bio, contact information, and more. This week's plug is another musical one. If you love the darker, heavier, eviler aspects of SKALD, you owe it to yourself to check out the newest album from Cough. Still They Pray. Hailing from my hometown of Richmond, Virginia, Cough are brutal, wicked doom metal rockers, and this newest album was produced by the frontman of another one of my favorite doom metal bands, Electric Wizard's Just Oborn. Check it out on Spotify today. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.